Blue Phoenix by Doragon Kishu. If you believe hard enough, your spirit will carry you there. Chapter 1. The Quest for Frost Realm. Despa, Day 1. The southern port of Despa, known as much for its Four Kings Tavern and the travelers who pass through it to break from their long voyages in the southern sea, as it is for the great merchants who did their business there. But more than that, as a meeting place for adventurers not necessarily from Despa, but other lands, who come together in the name of adventure, both for treasure and cause. Such is the case for Ornhawk, a renegade drow and ranger, who finds himself in the unlikely place of Four Kings Tavern, awaiting a paladin who's reached out to him. His dark blue hood drawn to cover his face and black skin, sure to draw hostility at every turn. But the paladin's letter intrigued Ornhawk, and so he came.
Ornhawk, my name is Quartz, and I am a paladin of North Protme. We are gathering a party of 9 able adventurers to travel to the ice wastelands of Vive, our destination being Frost Realm, in the mountains of the Trigon. Our goal, to capture the mysterious Blue Phoenix, an item told to bear great power. We need a second ranger. Our first is a human named Arrow, perhaps you've heard of him, who we will acquire after our rendezvous with you, should you agree to this meeting. The location of said meeting will be in the Four Kings Tavern, in the southern port of Despa. I realize for you to leave the dark fortress of Scaeum puts you at significant risk, due to your betrayal of your kind. But I believe in what you've done, and I reach out a hand of trust and faith to you in hopes that you reply, and or join us. Yours truly, Quartz von Richtelsemer, Paladin of North Protme. You must be Ornhawk, the ranger, right?
Came a gruffy voice. Ornhawk looked up from his wine to see a fair-skinned, dark brown-haired dwarf in white gold armor.
I am, replied Ornhawk. Well, we best be on our way. We have more party members to gather. It will be night soon, which I know your kind prefer to travel in.
He spoke plainly. Ornhawk wasn't sure what to make of the dwarf. He was right. The drow despised the light, but still, why would a paladin trust the company of a drow? Outside waiting with 3 horses was Samea, a young female cleric, who seemed timid, but nodded at Ornhawk anyway as he mounted his chestnut-colored horse. Quartz rode a black warhorse, and Samea a white stallion.
Our ship leaves soon, ya!
Hollered the dwarf, and the 3 of them were off to catch it. Chapter 2. Beyond the Southern Seas of Despa. The Southern Sea of Despa. The dwarf Quartz returns after speaking to the captain of the great sea vessel Mariath. The waters are a bit rough, but this would only be the beginning of a 14-day voyage. Ornhawk sits alone, his hood still over his drow visage, and carves at a dark piece of wood. Samaya, her short blonde hair and long bangs over her face, peers through deep blue eyes at the curious ranger.
I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself, Ornhawk. We were in a bit of a hurry. I am Quartz, Paladin of North Protme, speaks the dwarf loudly. And this here is Samea, of the Orange Light Order.
With this he gestures towards the young girl.
She will be our cleric on our quest.
Neither Ornhawk nor Samea speak, but they do meet gaze for a moment.
All right, I hate sea travel, so I'm going below to see just how many hours of this 2-week journey I can sleep through.
And with this, Quartz was gone. Several moments of silence went by before Ornhawk finally spoke.
You have questions, ask them.
I wonder why you're not lowering your hood. I mean, I know about the drow, but you're different, right? With this, Ornhawk lowered his hood to display his sharply elven features, black skin, and blue-white hair, his eyes a golden color. With this, several deckhands seemed to become uncomfortable and awkward, but go about their work.
Words don't carry much weight in this world. I am a drow, and it is indeed wise that these men fear my kind, spoke Ornhawk, who continued working on his wood. But I must say, I have never traveled with the likes of a paladin. Shocked that he reached out, and for that matter, found me.
He speaks very highly of what you did at Wadwalt village, she replies, starting to relax for the first time in his company. With this, Ornhawk's woodwork suddenly freezes, then continues.
Well, we are in a small world, he added. I know you're there, rogue, spoke Ornhawk suddenly, without looking up. Into the light suddenly appears a raven-haired girl, with a scar across her face, darkly clad, startling Samaya.
Just observing.
Do you like what you see? Asks Ornhawk.
Who am I to judge a drow? I've done many things one might consider dark, the rogue girl responded. Are you Minea? Our rogue? Spoke Samaya, nervously but hopeful. Maybe, she responded, taking a large bite out of an apple, then tossing the other half towards Ornhawk, who in one brisk movement knocks the apple out of the air and draws his saber. Call me Min, spoke the rogue as she backed back into the shadows. Chapter 3. Norwin. The Mariath arrived 16 days later, 2 days longer than expected due to rough seas, at the northeastern port of Cray, in the land of Norwin. Quartz stepped off the ship looking even more pale than usual.
I hate sea travel.
He then went to retrieve the horses. Ornhawk and Samaya stepped off into what was likely the coldest breeze either of them had ever experienced.
Well, this ought to be fun,
spoke Ornhawk as he pulled his cloak around his shoulders and put his hood back over his head. I'm sure Quartz has secured us some more adequate attire, responded Samaya. Wine, wine, wine. I thought you were a ranger, spoke Min as she walked past them, briskly pulling on thick leather gloves. She then turned and faced the two new comrades. It is called Frost Realm, after all.
Min, is that you?
Suddenly hollered Quartz, seeing the rogue as he approached with the horses. He gave her a great squeeze. There wasn't time to get back to you. I was kind of... she began.
On the run, as usual?
Interjected the deep, warm voice of Arrow, a human ranger. Arrow was a sight to behold. A strong, lean, yet robust man with a sharp blonde beard, yet brown, shaggy hair. His eyes a dark brown.
Good to see you, Arrow,
spoke Quartz warmly as he embraced arms with him. Suddenly Arrow's gaze attached itself to Ornhawk.
A second ranger.
I thought you were joking. With this, Ornhawk pulled down his hood once more. A drow? Arrow looked at Quartz. Are you mad? Where we're going, we'll be surrounded by Arctic orcs. Gnolls and goblins. A young bald man with a long black braided ponytail and dark red robes spoke as he approached, his head looking down at a book. He looks up. I really don't think they'll mind.
This is Tero, a monk from the Palace of Pei, spoke Quartz as he arm-embraced with Tero. Good to see you again, lad,
Quartz continued. And you, Quartz, Tero replied as he glanced around at the group gathered. Interesting assortment you have here.
This? Oh, this ain't nothing. Wait until you meet the Warlock,
Quartz replied in amusement.
Warlock?
Arrow said in shock. Chapter 4. In walks the Warlock. The northeastern port of Cray, in the land of Norwin. An unrelenting storm strikes the northern port of Cray. Jayark Tavern. Quartz and his party members spent much of the day within the Jayark Tavern. Samaya was right. Quartz had secured proper attire for their journey across the frozen wastelands of Skrir. All that remained was their last few party members, who had yet to arrive, 2 days after Quartz ship arrived in Cray. Samaya, Tero, Arrow, and Quartz play cards with a couple hunters, while Min hides in the shadows watching, and Ornhawk stands at the door of the inn, hood drawn as usual, staring at the snowy front which stretches out to distant mountains before him.
Within Trigon was the frozen fortress of Frost-Rhealm, the tower of the Knights of Dark Frost, and the Frost Giant's Maw, a giant cave. These three things form a triangle, which is the Trigon. Orhak lets out a decent sigh.
"What is it?"
speaks Min, who suddenly appears at the Ranger Drow's side. Orhak looks down at Min.
"Thinking of my home.
I never thought I'd leave it, let alone be exiled to a dark forest above ground, let alone travel to a place like this." Min was surprised that Ornhak opened up to her. Perhaps he was surprised as well, but he did not show it. Quartz may have been right to bring him, she thought to herself. "Come, sit, drink, play cards, Ornhak. You're making me nervous standing at that door hours on end," spoke Arrow. Ornhak turned towards the table and stepped forward, pulling down his hood once more. Many within the tavern took notice, and a murmur of concern seemed to fill the otherwise warm setting. Taro stands. "Here, take my spot. I was letting them win anyway," the monk spoke with a smile. "I don't believe you," replied Samaya, feeling her ale a bit. Ornhak sat at the table when suddenly he felt a firm hand upon his shoulder. "We don't serve your kind here," spoke the large innkeeper. "He's a good man," spoke Samaya as she too stood. "It's all right," replied Ornhak, who reached back and took the innkeeper's hand into his with a very tight squeeze. "Ugh!" The innkeeper grimaced and fell to one knee, but Ornhak released it once standing, and pulled the large, black, fur-laden coat Quartz had supplied over him, and walked outside. The next morning, Quartz made his way down the stairs earlier than any other, as usual, only to find the innkeeper, 2 barmaids, and 3 remaining customers all asleep, with a dark purple glow around each of them. "Hello, Quartz," spoke a deep purple-robed man, standing in the doorway of the inn, his black shoulder-length hair draping down before his slightly bowed face, with eyes glowing red underneath, his hands stretched out as he cast a spell of sleep upon the inhabitants. "Best leave whilst no one takes notice," he continued. Quartz smiles. It was Chalice Brome, the warlock. Chapter 5. The Eye. Colder than frost is the wicked's heart. The Trigon, Frost-Rhealm, the wizard Norstat's magical chamber. Looking into a great green pool of light is the wizard Norstat, wizard of Frost-Rhealm, servant to Prince Terov. His dark blue robes, long white and silver beard, and glowing green eyes reflecting the light, portray a darker version of the traditional image of a wizard. "What is it? What do you see?" comes a voice from behind him, the voice of Prince Terov. "More adventurers seeking the power of the Blue Phoenix," he speaks emotionally. Prince Terov steps into the light, tall, with white hair and light bluish skin. Though he looks no older than 35, he uses a cane to help himself walk. "And this concerns you?" he continues, speaking to Norstat. "Only a little." Suddenly the pool's light goes out, and the wizard turns to face his prince. "But your ailing health concerns me more, my prince," speaks Norstat in a chilling tone, as he takes one of the prince's shoulders with a cold, bone-like grasp. He then guides the prince out of his magical chamber. "You needn't worry about these things. I'm sure our Knights of Dark Frost will put an end to them." The wizard's words echo off the cold fortress walls as he takes Prince Terov to his sleeping chambers. Cray. Samaya, Arrow, Ornhak, Taro, and Min are all abruptly awoken by the gruff voice of Quartz. "Wake up! We leave at once," he spoke, leaning into each of their chambers. The 6 of them headed to the edge of town where 3 sleds waited, and the many huskies that would pull them. Standing and waiting was the warlock Chalice Brome, what looked to be a young male hooded wood elf, and a female half-orc fighter. "This is Krent," Chalice gestured towards the half-orc, "and Briatoa," he gestured towards the elf. "The town has yet to wake. Let's be off. Report, Min," spoke Quartz. Suddenly Min appeared by Quartz's side. "I've seen no movement."
On the first sled was the human ranger, Arrow, the monk, Taro, and cleric, Samea. On the second sled was the drow ranger, Ornhawk, dwarven paladin, Quartz, and elven druid, Briatoa. And the last sled held Krent, the half-orc warrior, Chalice, Brome, the human warlock, and Min, the human rogue. The blizzard-like snow stretching out to the plains, making their path almost blinding. "Once we get beyond those mountains, it isn't going to be easy," spoke Ornhawk loudly to Quartz. "Beyond the Arctic human scouts, there's the White Orc hunters, and beyond that, the Knights of Darkfrost," he continued. Quartz merely nodded in reply, with a resolute look upon his brow. "How can you see in this weather?" spoke Samea loudly to Taro, referring to Arrow, who drove the huskies forward. "Rangers," replied Taro with a smile. Meanwhile, on the third sled, they did not speak at all, as Krent helmed it. Min sat on the back corner of the sled, toying with some black gems as she eyed the warlock, who seemed almost to be in a trance, sitting, his eyes closed, a faint purple glow around him. By the time they reached the mountains and found the path they'd take, it was nearly nightfall. They tied up and fed the huskies, hoping they'd return to them in 2 to 3 days' time. If not, the husky trainer was ordered to come retrieve them.
"Arrow will lead us through the pass, with Ornhawk watching the rear,"
hollered Quartz, while snow and wind slashed against his face, carrying his words away shortly after they were spoken.
"Krent and I will be behind Arrow, then Taro and Briatoa, then Min, then Samea and Chalice," he finished.
And so they were off, barely able to see beyond who walked in front of them, but that was enough.